doctors, more likely to succeed and more likely to cost less. Another important finding in Greenhalgh's review was the importance of co-design. So in the subset of projects that actually seemed to work, it sure sounded a lot like Oscar kind of stuff. It was about co-design, it was about organic growth, things being done in-house, and when she came to present her paper here, I told her about Oscar, and she was very excited to learn more and hear how this development goes, but it certainly, in terms of her huge meta-analysis, fits the parameters of the kind of initiatives that are way more likely to actually end up working in the long run. And so she said the dramatic differences in success between off-the-shelf, commercially developed systems versus the homegrown ones that actually seem to work better, and in what circumstances small is beautiful deserves further critical exploration, but it feels like we're on the right track. And I think the evidence suggests that we have a lot higher odds of success with IT projects like this one. She was talking about specific kinds of future research that are needed, and again, this description of how can modularized systems that support effective proactive clinical care in local settings be interfaced with other small-scale systems so to achieve multiple objectives. Well, gosh, that sounds a lot like Casey. It's already happening. It's the perfect example. She also suggested that a systematic review of the ethics and practicalities of data sharing is needed, and that needed to, and they began to do a review of that, and it was just another huge task. But it was quickly identified as this is something that needs to be done, and the review needs to look at the balance between technical security and accessibility, the nature of trust, the desire or not of patients to view their own data, and of course, we don't have to put patients' data in a big pile in the middle and then give them a viewer into it for them to see it. We could just send them copies of their own lab reports or give them a personally controlled health record like my Oscar. The data need not reside in the pile in the middle for them to be able to see it. The changing dynamics, the involvement of patients, and I think again it was a great thing about Casey that patients were engaged at the front end. Wow. This is interesting. In 2009, 3,500 physicians surveyed in the UK, 79% said they would not seek mental health treatment from the NHS, citing concerns about the confidentiality of their information. In July 2007, the British Medical Association actually voted for non-cooperation on centralized records and called for an inquiry into the NHS Connecting for Health. And I thought this was an interesting excerpt from the deliberations of the British Medical Association. I can read it for yourselves.
When was this statement?
This was from the deliberations that led to that vote for non-cooperation.
2007.
Yeah, and I think, the way that sounds a lot like some consents that I've seen out there that are completely inappropriate. In 2009, there was a report called the Roundtree Report that assessed 46 databases across major government departments and found that a quarter of the public sector databases reviewed were illegal under human rights or data protection law. More than half have significant problems with privacy or effectiveness and would fall foul of a legal challenge. Britain is out of line with other developed countries where records on sensitive matters like healthcare are held locally. In Britain, data is increasingly centralized and shared between all local data, between the police and the government. And the benefits claimed for sharing are often illusory, and sharing can harm the vulnerable. So you can all imagine where very marginalized populations might be afraid to seek care if they think that somebody somewhere else in the system is going to be able to see that. The UK public sector is spending over £16 billion a year. Only about 30% of the government IT projects succeed. So they suggested that there's developing consensus among medical practitioners that for safety, privacy, and system engineering reasons, we need to step back from the centralized shared record model to the traditional model of provider-specific records and a messaging framework that enables data to be passed from one provider to another. Interestingly, here in BC, the government has a plan to create an integrated information access layer, which would be a big central spine across ministries. This is the request for proposals, and so it's the IAL, and it's based on the eHealth initiative and the conceptual blueprint. I'll show you the InfoWays plan. And the idea is to share, to centrally store and share across various ministries patient information, including health information. So this is the Canada Health Info Community Electronic Health Record and model for the government's integrator system. So it's a big sort of central spine concept. Here's what the Privacy Commission, actually also here in BC, the government has a plan to expand to change FIPA and expand its power. And just in March, they made a submission to change the legislation and make it even easier to spread information around and even more restrict, in a sense, patients' rights to not have that happen. And here's what the Privacy Commissioner just did into that review. First of all, they said the government shouldn't proceed with any more data sharing initiatives until a meaningful public consultation process has occurred and the outcome of that process is an enforceable code of practice for data sharing programs. They said that for an infringement of the right of privacy to be lawful, it must be proportional to the public interest that is achieved. So obviously, if somebody has a contagious TB or something, and all of us are at risk, then that's a proportionality case. But it's worrisome how the belief that circulates that maybe it's completely reasonable on much more minor issues for information to be broadly disseminated. And so I would have thought this was already enshrined in legislation. The Privacy Commissioner is asking that be. And this is a really important point the Privacy Commissioner said. Privacy impact assessments must be completed at the conceptual, design, and implementation phases of an electronic record project. Just like we did, Casey. And this requirement should apply to health authorities as well as ministries of government. So I'm sure many of us have seen initiatives that are years down the road, still have not met privacy requirements, and causing broad frustration for those who have spent a lot of money on initiatives that were never going to be compliant with privacy parameters. And what should have happened on day one was figure out that privacy stuff first and build something elegant and useful that fits the parameters. So things to consider, I think we need to be cautious about the transmission or direct entry of any identifiable patient clinical information from our offices into FIPA governed databases beyond current information transmitted for billing and such. That there has to be clear consent in those circumstances and that we need to understand the implications of it when we do it. There actually isn't evidence to support meaningful benefit to patient outcomes on these large-scale IT projects when information generated in private physicians' offices is centralized. There may be some benefit on drugs and allergies. That's a different, and we have PharmaNet here. That's a different data set. But the information that we generate in our offices is a qualitatively different thing, and an important part of us doing our job is that trust. And there really isn't evidence to support that that information really needs to go anywhere else except, in a specific manner for the purposes of care. And there's some evidence as well that when we upload subjective diagnoses, that it can actually contribute to diagnosis momentum. And as a friend of mine in the UK said, it's nice to have the drugs and allergies, but at what point do I stop taking history in the emergency room? Of course, an important part of doing our job is taking the history properly. And if all you do is go to a computer terminal and mindlessly accept what somebody else had to say, and you don't create your own clinical impression, then you're not really doing your job. And my husband is a specialist, and he never reads what somebody else thought before he creates his own opinion. And another really important piece in that is the importance of narrative. And in fact, as much as patients sometimes at groups stand up and say, I don't want to keep telling my story, they need to tell their story. Telling their story is part of getting better. Building the narrative of their illness together is a really important piece of getting better. So there's two qualitatively different kinds of data. There's what I would call particulate information, it's transferable like a drug or lab result. And then there's narrative